Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Austin Alves, and I'm going to be interviewing people to learn about different careers and how to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. In this video, I'm going to be interviewing Mr. David Miyamoto, an international business lawyer. Please enjoy. Okay, so thank you so much for doing this interview. Let me give you a little bit of background on why I'm doing this project. So, as you know, a lot of students right now are in this current age are doing a lot, stacking up their extracurricular list, trying to get all the A's, 1600 SAT, all for college. And then sometimes I pause and wonder, well, why are we doing this? Because we do it for college. College is for a good education, which is for a good job, and a good job is for being financially successful. But financially being financially successful doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the most happy and meaningful life. So I've been doing some interviews with different people to see what really does make a meaningful life and how to balance career with pursuing what you like and living an enjoyable life, sort of. So before we start, is it okay if I post the recording of this interview on YouTube?
Sure, unless something really weird happens.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll get right into it. Could you please introduce yourself, your background, your sort of life story, if you will, for the interview?
Okay, sure. So I'm David Miyamoto. Um, we're doing this here in Southern California. I'm a Southern California native. I was born and raised in a town called Gardena. Um, Went to local schools there, then went to UCLA for my undergrad degree in political science. Continued on at UCLA Law School, and then have been practicing law for the past 41, 42 now years. In the arc of things, I'm probably a year or two away from retirement. Raised our family in Palos Verdes. The last 9.5 years of my practice, my wife and I moved to Japan, where I continued doing international dispute resolution, but through my law firm's Tokyo office. We came back last July, and shortly thereafter, through an introduction from the coaches of the Whitney High School mock trial 2021 team, I had the pleasure to be one of the two coaches for the Whitney mock trial 2022 team, which is how I met Austin. So anyway, that's the minute and a half version of 66 and a half years of life on this earth.
At what point did you know that you wanted to pursue a career in law?
That's a great question. So, one accurate answer would be that I had a strong suspicion by high school. And the reason I had that suspicion was I began to really enjoy the classes that focused on reading and writing. Um, Not to the exclusion, but certainly more so than hard science or math oriented classes, which in my generation, to be honest, were quite popular. um, but I just really enjoyed the acts of reading and as well as writing. And also what I'll call problem solving in a social or cultural context. And above all, the practice of law at whatever angle you do it, and there's many, many, many different angles, is really about helping parties, be they companies or governments or individuals, kind of rationalize and perform their social contracts with their counterparties.
Mhm.
So once that um, marriage, if you will, of enjoying the acts of reading and writing, as well as kind of logical problem solving came together,
Mhm.
a a natural um, profession was the legal profession for me,
Mhm.
and that happened pretty early, which is why I think I chose to major in political science at UCLA,
Mhm.
which is a good pre-law area of focus.
Was there anything in particular about the legal field? Was it, let's say the problem solving aspect or maybe like the theatrics of the courtroom? What like specific element drew you to law out of all of the humanities?
Yes, so I don't think for me, although it is for many people, it was necessarily the performance aspect or theatrics.
Mhm.
Because I think at that point I didn't really know that I would go into the area that they call litigation or dispute resolution.
Mhm.
And for example, like business law or corporate law really isn't very theatrical, although you clearly are, sort of solving
Mhm.
or putting together deals which creates a solution for your client and the other side's client, or there could be multiple clients. But it was, I think, more the act of um, putting things together and trying to come out with resolutions or solutions that um, was of most interest to me.
Mhm. Could you talk a little bit about the specific area of law that you practice?
Sure. So when I started, I was mainly doing what they would call civil business litigation, which is to say it was courtroom proceedings, but not on the criminal side of things.
Mhm.
So when two or more entities, end up with legal disputes, again, whether it's me versus you or a company versus another company at whatever level, um, the law provides recourse if you try to enforce what you believe to be your legal rights and you just fail. The other side doesn't do what you want them to. And again, I that fit my interests very well. You have to do a lot of writing, you have to do a ton of reading to understand what case law, which are decisions of other courts, kind of tell you about the legal issue at hand. And then you also can apply that to trying to solve your client's legal problems. So I immediately dropped into that after law school. The types of cases that I've worked on over 4 decades really have changed a lot. One common element is, and this is kind of adding in another area of interest that I've always had, which is um, business and law at an international level,
Mhm.
with a particular interest for me in East Asia. So each of the private law firms that I've been either an associate or a partner of have very active international practices, including what I'll call a Pacific Rim orientation, so North America and Asia. And those kind of deals generate legal disputes. Um, sometimes it's one side just not performing. Sometimes it's misapprehension of what they agreed to. It could be a lot of different things. But I
Mhm.
would say over the 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, now, much of the legal disputes that I've worked on have been that type of Pacific Rim international legal dispute orientation.
Mhm.
The subject matter changes because what people are doing change. So just give you a quick couple of examples. in the early 80s through the early 90s, um, a lot of Japanese and Korean and Chinese companies were trying to establish a foothold in the US market or North American market. If they were manufacturers, they were setting up US distribution companies, trying to get their goods and services in distribution here in North America. And, that generates commercial disputes because people say, hey, you're supposed to send me 200 red cars. You sent me 400 purple motorcycles or whatever. It generates competition issues, antitrust issues. It can generate sort of who owns what. Um, and then I would say in the 90s and early 2000s, that shifted a bit more toward what I would call trying to protect your turf. So we had a lot of litigation that was really uh, intellectual property related, patent infringement cases, copyright trademarks, fair trade type issues. I would say in the last 15 years, so maybe 2010 to the present, there's been a lot of what I'll call non-judicial disputes, and that would be what private lawyers would call international arbitration or mediation, private judging, because the courts have become so crowded, very slow. Um, every court has to try a case against ex-President Trump. So if you're a business, you just can't get in there and have your case heard. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, I've been doing mainly international commercial arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's all kind of private law dispute resolution, but the types of cases have changed, not 100%, but kind of, there've been themes to each 10 or 15-year period.
Mm-hmm. What about the international realm of law interested you?
Okay, so that's another very good question. A number of my colleagues and friends in private litigation practice just have no interest in the international arena.
Mm-hmm.
They would prefer to go to the local superior court, state superior court, or local federal district court, because they're familiar with it. They get to know the jury pools, they know the judges, um, and of course that works for them. As they say, there's horses for courses. Um, for myself, I think given my political science background and my emphasis was in international relations, how companies from different parts of the world sort of saw their place in it, if you will, and sort
Mm-hmm.
of their place in the international stream of commerce, I guess, um, was a kind of value added or additional point of interest for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, it may not affect the way we handle a case or who we think should win or lose, but just trying to understand what happened. Why did this company from Germany and this company from Mexico end up so out of kilter in their expectations of this deal that
Mm-hmm.
they're now suing each other? And I think that's a super important question to ask in every single one of my cases. Just to understand that, I guess you'd have to say, globalized context for each of these disputes. So to me, that was, some people would view that as a big headache, an additional amount of work they would have to do. I enjoy that part, and I think that's what drew me to it.
Mm-hmm. You think you're a very intrinsically sort of curious person? Like you say, you like to know about how each company has like sort of their own place and how their agreements ended up getting to a stage where they need to sue for it. You seem like you'd like to sort of peel back the onion on a lot of different things and just explore.
Yeah, so the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that has been very useful for me in my practice,
Mm-hmm.
which is to say the can tell you one thing, the documents can tell you another thing, but your own curiosity and intuition, because curiosity leads to forming opinions that go into what your intuition tells you may have really happened, is to me a very big part of trying to understand a case and position it. You litigators say you should win the cases you should win. Like if your client's right and
Mm-hmm.
has a righteous position, you got to really fight hard to win that case. And once in a while, you try to win a case you probably should lose. But that curiosity and really trying to figure out what happened will often tell you, you know, my client's wrong. And so all everybody's entitled to their day in court, as they say, and they're entitled to have you be a zealous advocate and try to argue why they should win.
Mm-hmm.
But often we will tell our clients privately, because it's privilege, um, don't take this to trial or don't go through with the arbitration. Let's find a way to settle it. And
Mm-hmm.
and you often only get that if you're really curious about what happened, really happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you just believe what your client told you, you're always right.
Mm-hmm.
They never come in and say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong, but please litigate anyway."
Mm-hmm.
So, long-winded answer to your question, yeah, curiosity really is a useful characteristic in the field of law.
Do you think this attribute ever leads you to end up in a sort of situation where you may be at odds with your client, maybe your client wants to fight or dispute the claim, but you say it's a better idea to settle it?
Yes, that's um, an ever-present factor or consideration. Um, Trying to deal with your client's expectations, and it's a little bit a combination of bedside manner. Medical professionals have a fiduciary duty not to mislead their patients. But on the other hand, even if you're delivering kind of harsh news, you want to do it in a way that's empathetic and not cruel, right? So I think it's the same. Um, we spend a lot of time trying to be what the word be objectively candid, but not unduly harsh. And it's a skill. It's not that easy.
Hmm. Now I'm gonna make a big switch, jumping from
Okay.
career questions to the sort of lifestyle questions. What was it like moving to Japan?
Um, is a big move. I'd been there probably over 100 times, um, mainly on business, but often with my wife and friends or the kids. So it was not like moving to a foreign country that I was not familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, having spent most of my life, other than travel, particularly business travel in Southern California, you're just getting used to a very different culture and society. And that said, because I'm ethnically Japanese, I've been around a lot of Japanese people my whole life. I've done a lot of work for Japanese companies,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a place that we really wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say you take the challenging with the good, and there's challenges in any situation. So it's a very crowded country. Um, it's expensive. It can be bureaucratic, but one-on-one, people are very kind and really very gracious. Has an unbelievably efficient kind of infrastructure in the same way that Singapore does. Things work. You can get from point A to point B like clockwork, and you can drop your wallet on the sidewalk, and an hour later they track you down and give it back to you. Just all this, the stories you hear are true, like
Mm-hmm.
more than you hear. So in that sense, we knew it would be a relatively easy country to integrate into.
Mm-hmm. Back to the theme of, sort of a meaningful lifestyle and
Mhm.
balancing finance with enjoying life. Do you think people are as financially driven in Japan? Is there sort of a, the American dream, that sort of concept? Is that as strong? Is that a thing in Japan?
Uh, yeah, that's a very nuanced question. It used to be a much starker answer. I think I could give you a more black and white answer if I preface it by saying I think Japan has gotten more westernized over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back a generation or a half generation, um, the prevailing school of thought with which I agree is that Japanese society was so happy to have pushed itself into a top three economy in the world. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was the second largest economy and had a shot at becoming the largest, even larger than the US. They've backslid now to number three behind China. But in order to do that, there was a sense of egalitarianism where I would say 99% of the country would have said, yeah, we're middle class. I and my family are middle class, and we're happy with it, and that's good enough. So if you kind of put that mentality that that's what society offers me, I don't have to worry about having less than that. Very little poverty, very little homelessness, but I don't need to try to become one of the one percenters, which is kind of good because that's a little bit of an old boys club. So it's very hard to do that. And you have this humongous middle class. I mean, everybody just consider themselves middle class, including C-suite people in just major Japanese companies and banks and financial institutions that probably were making less. This would be 80s, 90s, 2000s than what a sort of mid-level non-director at something like Goldman Sachs or you know any major U.S. or international finance house or CEO of a major U.S. company. They've intermingled a little bit now to where CEOs of major Japanese companies are going to make a huge multiple of what the middle class makes, but the middle class in Japan is still bigger. So
Mm-hmm.
the social compact there is a little different than free competition United States is here. That said, and you probably heard, and this is also a true stereotype, they work their butts off in Japan. It's a very hardworking society. So it's kind of like, well, they work that hard, but really with no expectation that they will sort of
Mm-hmm.
become a 0.1 percenter. Largely true, but it's because it was sort of for the good of society.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, it's changing a bit, but that would be a big difference I saw there.
Mm-hmm. Where would you put yourself on that sort of scale? Like, on the one hand, you have laid back, I'm enjoying life, you only live once. And then on the other hand, you have like super achiever, go getter, self actualization.
Yeah, I would say in the arc of my career, which has spanned from the early 80s to now, um, there wasn't much of a choice. And again, you know, you make choices, life choices, and they create ramifications. And nobody forced me to go into the private practice of law with large law firms, but large law firms are profit driven. And in your earlier years of practice, your productivity to the firm is really based on how many hours of your time, your work, they can bill to the clients who largely, not exclusively, but largely pay for your services by the hour. And they don't, it's not so draconian that they would say, okay, Miyamoto, if you work like a maniac, we will guarantee that you'll make partner and make more money. It's a little bit more genteel than that, but people understand what it takes to get ahead. And you're selling your services as measured by time and quality. So quantity and quality. I would say a direct answer to your question is in the if I could do it again kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would do everything in my power to focus as much as I could on the quality and expertise of my work because in the balance of things, one, if you don't have a specialty that people want, you're gonna have trouble anyway. You're gonna have trouble with the quantity part. But if the quality of your work is low, then it doesn't matter how much you work. You could work 20 hours a day. It's just not very valuable to clients, so they're just going to stop paying for it. And I think most people would have a similar kind of thing. Like I'd rather be really good at what I do and have that viewed as very valuable. And of course, it helps as you move through your career. The longer you do it, the more the client should pay for each increment of time. But if you don't have much quality to your work, at some point you top out. So anyway, I would say I don't mind the social bargain I made with the firms that I've been in to work hard so that I can contribute to their bottom line. It's been a fair return, I think. But I think the lesson I've learned over 40 years is just make sure you're a really good lawyer with something valuable to your client base or the client base of your firm. Um, and then it makes your life easier.
Mm-hmm. So, zooming out from a career perspective, let's say you have lots of different things to balance in life: career, family, friends, your own time. What would you say is the most important to you? Do you think your career is the most, would you say you invest a lot in your career?
Uh, I think as a historical thing, yes, I did invest a lot in it. But then answering your question a slightly different way, I don't think it was the most important part of my life. I think by far the most important was my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it'd be a little too much to say that, it's the do you work to live or do you live to work?
Mm-hmm.
I don't, um, I think a lot of, so again, just by way of illustration, I think a lot of people in Japan end up living to work Um, whereas I think the US ideal, which I tried to adopt, is yeah, of course, work hard, but that's to allow you to live. Um, because I think, you know, at some point you retire or move on or whatever, and then you don't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's how I would answer that. It's important because you want to be valued in whatever you choose to do as a career or for your employment. But for myself, it didn't become the be all end all, nor would I want it to have been.
Mm-hmm. So one final question to wrap
Okay.
everything up. If you had to summarize your, and this might be difficult, if you had to summarize your entire life into one word, it can be like a value, an object, person, a place, one meaningful or the most meaningful, important thing to you, what would that be and why?
So that's a super tough question unless one kind of lays out the perspective that they're going to give you the answer. And it's a bit of a cop out, but I feel that's the way I have to say it. So I will give you the answer of from the perspective of where I am now,
Mm-hmm.
which is again, um, age 66 and a half, Social Security and Medicare eligible, but still working, but pursuing other interests that I believe are meaningful to me and hopefully helpful to others, such as mock trial. Um, the word I would say is intentionality. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Having come this far, what I can say is it be it would be a good word to put in your bag that you're going to carry with you throughout your life to try to do things with intent. And you're not always going to know, it won't always be a fully informed intent. You just don't know yet, right? I mean, a lot like you're aimed out of the gate when you're young, and you should be looking forward to this or that or life choices. There comes a point where you're saying, well, looking back, how do I feel about that? And how does that inform what I want to do with, it's kind of like a baseball thing. All right, I'm in the seventh inning now. Where are we? And what's my strategy for the eighth and ninth inning? But in any of the, however you want to analogize it, there should be some intentionality to um, just drawing up your game plan, I guess it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I I think the mere fact that you're doing this exercise, you don't have to put it in those terms, but it would be it's an act of figuring out your intentions. So, I'm not a classic Latin linguist, but so many of the Latin words kind of teach a lot. Intention, intent, intentional, intentionality. It has so many different meanings depending on whether it's a verb or an adjective or a noun, but it all means what is the meaning, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I would say this really does get very Roman or Greek philosophical, but it's like, what is the meaning of life? It just really means thinking about it a lot as you go along,
Mm-hmm.
and it can change. I think you can go this way for a long time and then say, okay, now I'm where I am today, 45, the 45-year-old Austin. The meaning of my life is changing. So the intentionality aspect now will be to go this way. It's a good, to me, it's a good tool to have in my back, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Miyamoto,
You're
for
welcome.
the interview. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that light going out is really kind of weird, isn't it? That big tropical storm is not supposed to come till tomorrow or Sunday, actually.
Sunday, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah. But once again, thank you so much for doing this interview
you're
and
welcome.
have a nice rest of your day and have a nice weekend.